Can you hear me all right?
Now you can. Okay, yeah, great. Yeah, as stated, I'm Nathan Looning. I am the Director of Transit with the City of Regina, and I wanted to provide a bit of an update today on the electrification of our fleet. And in particular, we've had some of our buses for one. So, there we go. Okay. So yeah, I just mentioned we've had some of our buses for 1 full year, so we were able to see what they were able to do, some of the information and data that came back from that, and so I want to present that here today. I also have with us today Garrett Reinders. He's just in the corner over there. He's the Manager of Sustainability, Sustainable Energy and Adaptation. I may invite him up here to give us a few numbers as well, or if you have any questions on that. Okay. So to start off here, just to give some background, the city was approved for $26 million from the federal government through the Zero Emissions Transit Fund to purchase and install infrastructure for electric buses. So the city contributed $26 million as well, and that translated into 20 electric buses plus the infrastructure, which included 20 plug-in chargers and 40 pantograph chargers. At the time, the direction from council was to purchase electric buses for all new bus purchases, and this was really a good way to kick off the transition to electric. So in April of 2025, we received our first 7 electric buses, and at that time we had 10 chargers that were commissioned and ready to be used with those buses. And these buses are they're not different from what we have today in terms of the features that they have. So these are Nova buses, and they're made by Volvo. They have like the standard features in terms of how big they are. They're 40 feet. They did come with diesel heaters on the buses themselves. So that helped out in the winter time when it got really cold. Those diesel heaters kicked in. And the batteries for these buses were located on top of the unit, which is different, obviously, from a diesel bus. And in 2026, here, just a few months ago, we received the 13 remaining buses, and we've had all our chargers installed, plus the 40 pantograph overhead charging units. So overall, as I said, we've been running for 1 full year, and here's a little update on how they have performed. So these buses were a replacement of our older diesel buses. So these new buses needed to be used every day, and they were used every day. They were on a variety of runs. We have buses that go on trips as short as 30 kilometers a day, all the way up to 400 kilometers a day. The range of the electric buses through the spring, summer, and fall was around 340 kilometers on a single charge. And typically we did our charging overnight when they came in for the evening before they went out the next morning. And typically it took 4 to 5 hours to charge from empty to get them up to a full charge. In colder weather, we saw the range around 220 kilometers on a single charge. So when we say colder weather, we're looking around that -20 range or colder than that, when there's more demand on the battery. But as I noted, because there was diesel heaters on the bus, those kicked in to help keep the compartment warm, and they kicked in usually around 12 degrees as needed to heat the cabin. So at times when it got colder, they may be on constantly, but at times they were used infrequently if it wasn't below 12 degrees. Despite the reduced range, we still had good use of the electric buses through the winter time, because 80% of our buses go out do less than 200 kilometers a day, and so they worked well with the rest of our fleet. And so overall, we had fewer issues of the buses breaking down on the road versus diesel buses. The only issues that we had with the electric buses was the temperature and when the diesel heater kicked in. At times, it wasn't kicking in when it needed to, when it got really cold, and so that was drawing on some of the battery power, which reduced some of the range. But that was a simple configuration, and that was just a reset and ready to go back out on the road. The other issue that we had was just more of a process issue, where maybe some of our employees forgot to plug it in overnight, so it went over out on the road without a full charge, so we had to take it off the road just to make sure that it wasn't sitting on the road. So, but if they get charged every night, there's no issue at all. And like I said, despite what some may have claimed, the buses would run every day as part of our regular fleet. I wanted to share just some of the stats that we've seen from the first year of operation. When you look at fuel consumption, we saw a savings in diesel of around $45,000 annually per bus. When you look at the electricity charges for the bus, that was around $21,000. Overall, so you're seeing $24,000 in savings per bus in fuel. And note, this is before prices started to increase and go up, so we expect that savings to grow depending on how long or how much fuel prices remain high. But one thing to note here, a challenge that we have to respond to is the demand fee. So to have the chargers connected to SaskPower's grid, we regularly pay more to a demand fee than the cost of electricity. So as an example, last September, we paid about $3,700 for electricity, but about $9,000 in demand fees. So we've been working to try to manage the charge cycles to minimize the number of buses charging at one time, to keep that demand fee from growing further. So I want to talk about emissions, and this is just for the first 7 buses because we've had them for the year. So over the year, they traveled over 400,000 kilometers. We avoided 250,000 liters of diesel because of running these first 7 buses. And so we reduced 680 tons of CO2 from going into the environment, and that resulted in a net reduction of just over 430, even when you account for the charging emissions, how they get charged. So a good reduction overall. I want to talk about the overall cost, because we talked about diesel and charging, but there are costs to maintain diesel buses and electric buses. But when we broke down the cost of a battery electric bus per kilometer versus a diesel, we found that diesel buses were costing $1.51 per kilometer to run versus 76 cents per kilometer for a battery electric bus. So overall, less to maintain. What we're seeing, or what we haven't experienced yet, is the long-term cost that we see that there will be a cost to replace the batteries around the 8-year mark. Right now, those are around $250,000 per vehicle, but we expect that those may come down when we get to a point where we need to replace them. So overall, the buses performed reliably and expected, and even surpassed our expectations here in the Saskatchewan climate. And they require less to operate in terms of inputs overall when we look at diesel buses. But the challenge before us is funding. Right now, as stated, when we purchased these first buses, the federal government paid for 50% of the purchase, which made it very economically attractive for us to jump in. However, that funding has not been sustained, and municipalities, including Regina, have budgets to balance and tough decisions to make. The current purchase price for a standard 40-foot electric bus is around the $2 million mark. When you compare that to a diesel bus, which is around $1 million, municipalities are looking for a way to save money to balance their budget. And Regina Council recently decided on hybrid bus purchases, which are diesel, but have regenerative power. They cost about $1.3 million each, and they have fuel savings, about $6,600 per year in comparison to diesel buses, but that's not as big a savings as you see with battery electric bus. Another financial piece is some opportunities that we have to offset some of the costs that we might see in terms of the upfront costs, is how the city is selling intensity credits under the clean fuel regulation. So in 2025, we were able to make $40,000. We didn't have the electric buses for a full year, but we're estimating that about $10,000 per bus, and that's dependent though on the market for those credits. And really, what we've seen during this time, that's a lot of change when we purchased the bus versus waiting for it to arrive and based on its arrival, because there's a lot of talk about carbon tax, fuel prices, carbon tax disappears, the political atmosphere disappears in terms of cruising power, and so we're playing this kind of day by day. Right now, it's really advantageous to have these buses. As you know, the fuel price is high, and we don't know how long that's going to remain high. But it is saving us fuel in the long run by having them here in our fleet. So we have the 20 now, and they've been running great. So you may see them, you may recognize them because they have a flat roof on the top, and that's where the batteries are. So it's just kind of flat across there. You can see in this picture here, it's straight across them. The diesel buses that kind of go up and down, that sort of thing. And I believe all the buses start with 25, so we have, I think it's 2501 to 2520, that sort of thing. So you can see them out there on the road. So that's, this is just a brief presentation, but if you have any questions at all, Garrett and I would be welcome to answer if we can, noting that we are not the most technical experts, but we can give you some high-level data if you need it. So, over to you.
You mentioned in your business plan that you're expecting an 8-year term for the existing battery pack.
Yeah.
Is that something that's imposed by the manufacturer that you are forced to do it, or can you run past that 8-year if the batteries are still operating with minimal degradation and so on?
Yeah, no, good question about the 8 years on the batteries. So yeah, it's not something that we're mandated, but it's something that we have been told to expect, that around that 8-year mark that they may need replacement. We'll evaluate that at the time though, and obviously use them as best we can before we make that change. Sorry, go ahead.
When the battery is done, what's the ecological damage to get rid of them?
Great question. Garrett, do you know that answer? Well, for the disposal of the batteries?
I don't think we have that information yet. Yeah, sorry. We don't have a lot of that information yet. Like Nathan talked about, we're kind of waiting a little bit to see how that changes as we get closer to that 8 years. Like I know in talking with some of our facility staff who work on the chargers, their conversations with the manufacturer, they're not super clear how a lot of the stuff happens yet because they're so new. I don't know off the top of my head.
So I can't speak specifically to the electric buses and their disposal, the battery disposal process, but in general, what is happening with a lot of electric vehicles, batteries that are being pulled out of them, we're seeing the minerals, which are extremely valuable, they're being either, the battery itself is still intact and can be repurposed to either be storage for solar panels, something like that, where they don't need to be as robust as you need for a vehicle, especially a bus that has a lot of weight and needs a lot of power to get it moving. But in cases where the battery isn't in a condition where it can be repurposed, they will strip out the minerals and repurpose that. So they'll try and recycle as much of the battery components as they can, so that the amount of disposal is minimal. Most of the recycling facilities that we're seeing with EV batteries, they're stating that they can repurpose or recycle 95% or above of the battery itself. Most of what that 5% is the plastic components that are there to keep the battery together instead of the battery components themselves.
Thank you.
I have one other question. I came late, so you may have already talked about it, but really cold weather does not work well with these kind of vehicles. So how are these buses going to do it minus 40?
Yeah, they work well. So we've had them for 1 year, and we've had no issues with them. Within any electric vehicle, though, the range is decreased. So our range is 340 kilometers in like the spring, summer, fall. When it gets really cold, like minus 20, that range is around that 220 kilometers. So for us, it's really good though, because 80% of our vehicles that go out are below that 200 mark. So they go out and we have no issue with that. As noted, these were replacements for diesel buses, so we needed to make sure that they were running all the time, every day, and yeah, they've outperformed our diesel buses in terms of having issues on the road. So yeah, they perform really well.
And really the comment about electric vehicles not working well in the winter is really rooted in misinformation. There is, like touched on, there's range reduction in the battery, right? It depends on how cold it is. As it gets colder, we get a little bit more, that gets a little bit more extreme. But that's the one negative. Every other experience, I've had an EV for 6 years, every other experience in the winter is a better experience than a gas vehicle. It warms up almost instantly. It takes like 2, 3, 4 minutes depending on how cold it is. Most of these, they have an app where you can heat it up before you leave your house, which my wife absolutely loves. She hates being cold, so the quicker she can be warm, the better. And the lower center of gravity on most of these mean you get better traction, better control in the winter. So it's, in my mind, there's one drawback and there's a whole bunch of positives.
They always start.
Right, and they always start. There's no starter on most of them. You just turn them on and they go.
So we got a few there.
Why are the batteries on the roof not down? That's going to change the center of gravity. Makes the bus to tip over if you turn too sharp.
Yeah, so the question